believer in planning ahead. I have a constant reminder of that in my desk drawer back home. I have this letter that I've been working on for 42 years that I've never quite finished, and every time I find it, I'm like, oh, should have got this done by now. It should have been in the mail years and years and years ago, but I've just never been able to finish it. It's to a girl. Her name was Roxanne Bass. Isn't that a great name? Roxanne Bass. I met this girl sitting next to a campfire at church camp when I was 10. And that was the first time I ever began to realize that there was a difference between girls and boys. She was, to a 10-year-old, very easy on the eye. She had all that Marsha Brady's fashion sense down. And if you don't remember who Marsha Brady was, go ask an old person and I'll tell you. But she was, to a 10-year-old in those days, the queen of all fashion. Roxanne and I were sitting next to each other at this campfire, and the thing I remember most is not what she looked like, but that she simply paid attention to me. She was the first girl that didn't think I had cooties or I was icky or I was disgusting. She was the first girl that actually, at least I can remember apart from my mother, who kind of acted on the presumption that there was something in me that had value, and I knew that she felt that way because she got up and she left her girlfriends and she came over and sat with me on the back bench of the campfire, and when I wasn't looking, she held my hand. And I don't know if you remember that far back. The first time somebody does that, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, what is this all about? And I was kind of like, oh, what happened? And then I remember what she squeezed my hand back, like, calm down, it's going to be all right, David, it's going to be all right. And I was like, I like this is good. So we sat by each other by a campfire for a solid week at church camp, and then I went home, and I had managed to get her address before I left. And I started to write her that letter that I still have. Now, I don't know when it was for you. I don't know when that was for Wabash. But there comes a point in every person's life when you make the transition from knowing about something to knowing it. Right? Maybe it was when you were taking your driver's test. Some of us are old enough to remember that in times gone by, you used to take a driver's course in high school, or your father or your mother took you out on an empty lot or in a field and showed you how to do it. And there comes that moment when you go from hearing about driving to actually doing it, and you begin to understand this is quite a bit deeper and more profound reality than I thought about. For some of us, that was in parenthood. We read all the Dr. Spock we could get our hands on, and we read what to expect when you're expecting, and then the doc puts this greasy little ball of love into your hand, and you realize that kid's not going anywhere, and you're going to be stuck with them. And you begin to make the transition from knowing about parenting to knowing who your parents are. Faith's the same way. You can pick up the Gideon Bible in any motel or hotel, and you can read all you want about God. You can turn on television and hear people 24/7 talk about God. You can read magazines, books, watch videos. There is more information about people talking about God than there are hours or minutes in the day to take it all in. You can join a religious order and literally pray 24 hours a day. But there comes a moment somewhere for all of us when we go from knowing about Him to knowing Him. When God gets up and leaves the angels and leaves heaven and leaves the saints and comes over to our side of the campfire and takes hold of us, just like Roxanne's holding me. Remember that moment? Remember it? It varies how that moment comes to you. For some of us, it's a very profound, emotional thing. The man who wrote Amazing Grace, John Newton, I was blind, but now I see. He was a slave owner, and when he finally came to understand about how we are all slaves to sin and how he was trapped, and yet God had come to him and set him free, it was the most profound thing, and we still sing about that. I don't think he's the only one. Some of us have had that experience, whether it's a Billy Graham crusade or a church service or just being at home, maybe a near-death experience, maybe laying in the hospital. There just comes this moment when God stops being the subject and starts being the being that you share yourself with. Remember that? Remember that? It's kind of the difference between the trains out back. If you're here long enough, you don't hear them anymore. But if you stand on the tracks, they go from being just a fact and they become a reality in your life that you have to interact with. Well, God's the same way. Same thing happens to the church. There are worship services that are eminently forgettable. That we go and we think, that was good, now we can go eat. Or now we can go play golf. Or I've checked that box. But there are other ones, right? There are other times when our hearts are just laid open. And we walk out of here at benediction different than we were when we came in. There are these seminal moments in the life of a community of faith that are not tracked on the board full of pastors' pictures. It has nothing to do with who's in the pulpit. It really has nothing to do many times with what the choir was singing or whether the air conditioning was working. It was just a moment when God reached out and took hold of us. And we realized that he could have taken hold of a lot of other people, but he took hold of this church up on a bluff, above a river in Indiana. Of all the folks, he bypassed the Pope in Rome and the Mormon Temple in Washington, and he went by Billy Graham's house and Chuck Swindoll's, and he came here and he was with us. Can you think of times like that? Moments when God was so real, God could not be ignored. Well, if you have, then you understand the Psalter. Because the man or the woman who wrote the Psalter reading that was shared with us a few moments ago by Sarah was a person who was not talking about God. They were talking to God. They were saying, I am all about you. I am mad for you because you found in me value when no one else saw anything worth paying any attention to. You left behind a lot of other better opportunities so that you could come and invest yourself in me. You made me real. You made me special. And I want that again. God knows, God. There are enough things in this life that make me not feel good or make me not feel special. I have enough causes for insecurity in my days. I have enough things that make me feel vulnerable and pathetic and stupid and ugly. And I need you once more to step into my life and make me live again. And by the way, if you haven't felt that way, you will. Because you see, sooner or later, we all have to get over ourselves. We all have to be saved, not from the devil, not from hell, but from ourselves. And from our abiding fascination with ourselves. We need to just see that the world is bigger. So, if you cannot think of a time when that's happened to you personally, I mean, you cannot think of a time when that has happened here at Wabash, don't worry, you will in time. Because that's what God does. To quote Paul, God uses the foolish things of this life to shame the wise. God has a soft spot for the ugly and the silly and the stupid. He always goes and seeks them out. Which is why I suppose Roxanne came to me. I was the homeliest, silliest, boyish looking thing sitting around that campfire. And so that's why she singled me out. And that's why it felt so profound to me. So I went home and I started to write that letter to her. It started out, my dearest Roxanne. Roxanne's a great name. It's like right out of Cyrano de Bergerac. Cyrano fell in love with Roxanne. And he was too homely to woo her, so he found another guy that she fancied, and he would write these fabulous love letters to Roxanne and this other guy's name. Dearest Roxanne. And then I didn't know what else to write. Now I was lucky because being married to, or not being married, but being the son of a librarian and of a pastor and a teacher, I had ready access to all kinds of source material. I didn't have to go far. In fact, I could just walk out of my bedroom, down the hall, make a left, and there's my dad's office. It was all there. Anything I could want. The complete writings of Shakespeare, Robert Browning, E.E. Cumming, Ralph Waldo Emerson, David Thoreau. Everybody was in there, and if it wasn't there, my mother would get it for me. My mother just could never buy children enough books. When my kids turned 7, they got 70 books apiece. My kids are the only kids I know who own all the Caldecots and the Newberries, and that's because their grandmother was just a big believer in reading. So I started going through the books, and I started borrowing things. My dearest Roxanne, Your Beauty Walks in the Night. Lord Byron, he had a way with wooing the females. It could work, and I would like to be kind of a swashbuckling, brooding, Celtic, poetic kind of guy. It just didn't sound like me. So now I'm going to scratch that out, and I started again. My dearest Roxanne, how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. 1, 2, 3. No, it may work for Bill Shakespeare, but it wasn't for me. I even went as far as to go and look at some of my mother's bodice stripper novels that she kept by her bed at night, The ones where there's some woman enraptured by some hunky-looking guy. And, I tried to borrow some of the dialogue from that. And not only are those things terribly written, but it didn't sound like me. Hey, baby. This doesn't carry the right gravitas when it comes from a 10-year-old, with a bad haircut, who hasn't learned to wash enough, I tried, my mother went through a thing for a while with Robert Chandler, who wrote like all the early 1930 murder mysteries. Hey, good looking, you're so nice, I could throw a Buick at you. Or, she had a look so nice, I could feel it in my hip pocket. It just didn't sound like me when I wrote those down, so I'd scratch them out. And I kept writing and writing and writing, and every once in a while I would just get frustrated, and I would put the letter back in my desk, and I would forget about it, and then I would find it again, and I would think, I gotta finish this, I really gotta finish it. And years went by, and years went by. And I was 11, and 12, and 14, and 18, 25, and it's still sitting there, and I'm 52, and that letter still hasn't been finished yet. If you can understand my frustration, then you can also understand Paul's frustration when he speaks to the Galatians. Because he is writing to a group of people who are trying too hard. Too hard. Behind all this language that he uses about, I'm a Jew and those folks are Gentiles, was an ever-present temptation when it comes to faith. To go from knowing God to thinking we have to know everything about Him. When we do that, we forget that our faith is not in ourselves. It's not in our own eloquence or our own perfection. Everything we do is done in response to what was done for us first. As the choir sang earlier, we walk by faith and not by sight. Paul's trying to point this out in his day because there was a very far-flung effort to define exactly what the perfect life was supposed to be. This is why Jesus was always knocking heads with the Pharisees. Pharisees were good people. They were trying to promote holiness and godliness. What they forgot is who they were trying to promote it for. You do these things in response to God, not so that you can be God. God is not a vending machine. You put the right change in and then you get what you want out of it. God is altogether more than we are, Paul is saying. And so the law, he says, is good for one thing, and that is to show us how imperfect we are. But perfection was never our point in the first place. What came to us from the far side of reality and took its place next to us and laid hold of us was not we ourselves, but it was God. While we were still sinners, He loved us. While we were grubby and silly and stupid, He came and took hold of us. And so He is saying, get over yourself. Don't you understand in your frustration, God is at work, and God is saying, remember me? I'm your beloved. I'm the one that you are supposed to focus on. Not your eloquence, not your gift, not your response, but me. Love me. Because I love you. That's what I think of when I see that love. We need to think more about loving God than we do in how we love God. Can you see the distinction? Somebody brought this to me recently. We were talking down at Modog's having coffee. We were talking about Wabash Christian as it kind of stacks up against other churches. And this person said it kind of this way. They said, you know, what I wish my church family did was love God more than talk about the love of God. I wish my church family prayed more than they talked about praying to God. I wish for them that they would treat God more as a living reality that they share their lives and their love with, rather than a subject that's to be found in some book. That's a person who understood Paul in Galatians. Do you? Do you know why you come here on Sundays? Do you know why you do the things you do? Answer that. And maybe you'll get the answer that I got when I finally did cross paths with Roxanne. Oh yeah, we met again. Yeah. I was married. I was a broken man. I had been married, 9 kids at that point. And, we happened to be in the same part of the world. I have family that live over where she does at Loudonville, so I was over visiting them. And my cousin Kathy said that her friend Roxanne was going to be stopping by later to pick something up. And I said, Roxanne, that is not unusual. And, you know, Jane's, Betty's, yeah, but Roxanne is a pretty unusual. So what's her name? Well, her last name is Kowalski now, but she used to be Roxanne Babs. And I was like, that's her. Oh my gosh, I started to get all nervous. You know, I'm breaking out in the sweat. I'm like, oh, I never finished that letter. What is she going to think about me 30 years on? You know, I could have been the great love of her life. She married some schmuck named Kowalski. You know, it could have been Mills. It could have been so much better for her. She comes pulling up. You know, she's got one of these 15-passenger vans. She has 11 kids. She has a full life, okay? And she's married to a dairy farmer, which may explain why she has 11 kids. You need that many kids to milk the cows. And she gets out, and she comes in, and I can tell, you know, it's her right off. And my cousin Kathy puts 2 and 2 together when she comes in, and she says, this is my cousin David Mills, who I believe you know. And she knows. She remembers me. And I just fall apart. I'm just like, oh my gosh. I'm sorry, Roxanne, I'm sorry. You know, you gave me your address all those years ago. I said I was going to write you. I've been working on this letter all these years. Look, I looked at Bill Shakespeare. I looked at Elizabeth Barrett Brown. I looked at Lord Byron. I mean, I feel Danielle Steele. I looked at it. I'm sorry. And she just summed it up really well. She said, you know, the next time you fall in love, think more about the one you love and less about how you are going to love them. And everything will be fine. That's the gospel. Think less about yourself and more about the one who thinks selflessly about you. And everything will be fine. Wabash Christian. When we talk about pledge drives, when we talk about policy, when we talk about programs and staffing, those are the things that we do in response to what God has done for us. Think more about the one we do them for and less about how you will look doing them. And you will be fine. Be blessed. Allow God to get you over yourself. Allow yourself to be loved. That seems to me is the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. And that is the end of this lesson. Let's say we pray.